You don't belong here anymore, Mom. Those 6 words hit me like a freight train at 2 in the morning when I caught my own son whispering them to his wife in what used to be MY Kitchen.
And honey, I let out the longest breath you ever heard because after 43 years of raising that boy, cooking his meals, washing his clothes, sacrificing everything I had, including my own dreams of going back to school, working double shifts at the diner to pay for his baseball equipment and college applications, I never thought I'd hear my own flesh and blood tell me I didn't belong in the house I'd lived in for 37 years. The house where I'd changed his diapers, nursed him through chicken pox, celebrated every birthday, every graduation, every milestone that mattered. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson. I'm 68 years old, and I've been living in this 3-bedroom ranch house in Tucson, Arizona since 1987. When my late husband Frank and I bought it fresh out of the classified ads in the Arizona Daily Star for $89,000, which seemed like all the money in the world back then. Y'all, this house has seen everything. Birthday parties where I stayed up until midnight decorating, Christmas mornings when I'd wake up at 4 a.m. to start the turkey, homework sessions at the kitchen table where I helped Michael with algebra, even though I dropped out of high school to work. Frank's cancer treatments where I converted the spare bedroom into a makeshift hospital room. His funeral reception where half of Tucson came to pay their respects. And now, apparently, it's seen my own son deciding I'm nothing more than a burden he needs to get rid of, like an old appliance that's outlived its usefulness. Let me paint you the picture of how this nightmare started, sweetie, because the devil is always in the details, and these details are going to make your blood boil. It was a Tuesday night in October, one of those desert nights where the temperature finally drops below 90 degrees and you can actually open the windows. And I had been having trouble sleeping since Frank passed 2 years ago. Not just regular trouble, but the kind of insomnia that comes from losing your life partner of 42 years, the person who knew all your stories and still laughed at your jokes, the man who'd bring you coffee in bed every morning for 4 decades and kiss your forehead like you were still the 19-year-old girl he married. So I'd gotten into the habit of wandering around the house at night, sometimes making myself a cup of chamomile tea in the mug Frank bought me on our 20th anniversary trip to the Grand Canyon, sometimes just sitting in Frank's old brown leather recliner, the one he'd claimed was perfectly comfortable despite the fact that it looked like it belonged in a 1970s hunting lodge, and remembering better days when this house was full of laughter and love, instead of the tension that had been hanging in the air like Arizona humidity ever since Michael moved back in. That particular night, I heard voices coming from the kitchen, and since my son Michael had moved back in with his wife Jessica and their twin boys after he lost his job at Sundown Construction Company, a job he'd had for 15 years until the housing market crashed and they had to let half their crew go, I figured they were having one of their late-night talks about bills or the boys' school stuff, or maybe planning how they were going to get back on their feet financially. But honey, when I got close enough to hear what they were actually saying, my shoulders just dropped like I was carrying the world. Because what I heard wasn't a conversation between 2 people trying to figure out their lives. It was a conversation between 2 people trying to figure out how to get rid of me. "She's getting worse, Jess," Michael was whispering, in that tone people use when they're talking about someone they think is crazy. And I could hear Jessica making those little agreeing sounds wives make when they're enabling their husband's worst impulses. "She talks to herself when she's cooking, the way she forgets where she put things and then accuses us of moving them. The way she keeps bringing up Dad like he's still here, sitting in that damn chair. My mom's losing it, and I can't handle it anymore. I've got enough stress trying to find work without having to babysit a senile old lady." You know what? I stopped talking for a hot minute because the silence stretched between us like a canyon, except They didn't even know I was there, listening to them tear apart everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Jessica's voice came next, and sweetie, it was sharp as a knife dipped in honey. Michael, your mother treats this place like it's still 2007 and she's the queen of the castle. She criticizes how I cook the eggs. She rearranges the furniture when we're not looking because she says it's not where Frank would have wanted it. She goes through our mail like some kind of detective. And yesterday I caught her reorganizing the boys' backpacks because she said I wasn't packing their lunches with enough vegetables. She needs to understand that things have changed around here and we're the adults now. That's when my son, my baby boy, who I rocked to sleep every night until he was 3 years old, who I drove to Little League practice twice a week for 8 years, who I co-signed student loans for, even though Frank and I could barely afford our own bills, said those words that broke my heart clean in half. You don't belong here anymore, Mom. We need to start looking at assisted living places. Somewhere she can get proper care and we can get our lives back. I found some brochures online and there are places that aren't too expensive if we use her Social Security and maybe sell some of her stuff. Honey, I could barely get the words out, but I somehow managed to tiptoe back to my bedroom without them hearing me, stepping carefully around that creaky floorboard by the hallway bathroom that Frank had always promised to fix but never got around to. And I spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling fan that made that soft whooshing sound that usually helped me fall asleep. This was my house. Frank and I had scraped together every penny for that down payment, working extra shifts and skipping dinners out and buying generic groceries for 2 years to save up the money. I'd planted every flower in that desert garden, choosing varieties that could survive Arizona summers and still bloom beautiful in spring. I'd painted every wall, including that awful avocado green in the guest bathroom that seemed like a good idea in 1988, but looked hideous by 1995. I'd nursed Frank through his final days in the bedroom down the hall, holding his hand through chemotherapy treatments and radiation sessions and all those nights when he couldn't sleep because of the pain. And now, my own son was planning to ship me off like an old piece of furniture he didn't want anymore, talking about using my Social Security money and selling my belongings to pay for warehousing me somewhere I didn't want to be. The next morning came too soon, arriving with that harsh Arizona sunshine that turns everything gold and makes you squint even with the curtains closed. And I found myself whispering like someone might overhear when I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix. "Maggie," I said, and my voice broke right in half like a cookie dropped on concrete. "I think Michael wants me gone."
Margaret, bless her heart, had always been the practical one between us. She was the sister who balanced her checkbook to the penny, who kept emergency cash hidden in her freezer, who'd raised 4 kids mostly by herself after her husband Roger died in a car accident when the youngest was only 6. She listened while I told her everything I'd heard the night before, every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every plan they'd made for my future without bothering to include me in the conversation. "Dorothy May," she said, and I could hear the worry in her voice mixing with something else, something that sounded like the righteous anger our mama used to get when someone treated one of her daughters poorly. "That house legally belongs to you and nobody else. Frank left it to you in the will, not to Michael, not to anybody else. Don't you let them push you around just because they're having money problems. That's their problem to solve, not yours to fix by disappearing." But y'all, that's easier said than done when you're dealing with your own child, the baby you raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, the person who's supposed to love you back unconditionally but apparently sees you as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. I spent that whole day Wednesday watching Michael and Jessica differently. And honey, once you start looking for signs of disrespect, you see them everywhere, like weeds in a garden you thought was beautiful.
The way Jessica would sigh dramatically when I asked where she'd move my coffee cups, the ones Frank bought me for our anniversary, the ones with little desert flowers painted on them. The way Michael would get that impatient tone when I told him the same story twice, rolling his eyes like I was some kind of broken record instead of a woman trying to connect with her son through shared memories. The way they'd exchange those looks, you know the ones I'm talking about, when they thought I wasn't paying attention, those here she goes again looks that made me feel like a stranger in my own home, like an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed her welcome at a party nobody wanted her to attend in the first place. But what really got me, sweetie, what really twisted the knife they'd already stuck in my heart was watching how they treated my grandkids, 8-year-old Tommy and Tyler. Those boys had always run to Grandma Dorothy first when they came home from school, backpacks flying, shouting about their day and showing me their artwork and asking if I had any of those peanut butter cookies I made every Sunday. But suddenly, Jessica was intercepting them at the door, telling them Grandma needs her rest, or don't bother Grandma right now, she's not feeling well, or why don't you go play video games while Mommy talks to Daddy? My own grandsons were starting to walk past my bedroom like I was invisible, like I was already gone, like a ghost haunting a house where I no longer belonged. Before I tell you what happened next, and honey, this part is going to absolutely shock you because what I discovered was worse than anything I could have imagined. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon because you know I get so excited when I see y'all in the comments section sharing your own stories and supporting each other through difficult times. Speaking of which, what state are you calling home right now? Drop it down below and let me know. And sweetie, tell me honestly, have you ever had family treat you like you didn't matter, like you were just taking up space in their lives? Because your stories help me know I'm not alone in this crazy world, and they help other people realize they're not alone either. Now let me tell you what I discovered next, because what they were planning was about to backfire in the most beautiful, most satisfying way you can possibly imagine. Y'all, I found myself whispering like someone might overhear when I decided to do something I'd never done before in my life, something that would have horrified the trusting, naive woman I'd been just a week earlier. I started investigating my own family, like they were strangers, like they were criminals, because that's exactly what they turned out to be. That Friday morning, after Michael left for another job interview, his third one that week at various construction companies around Tucson, and Jessica took the boys to Robson Elementary School in her beat-up Honda Accord that made weird noises every time she turned left, I did something that would have rolled over in Frank's grave if he'd known about it. I went through their personal belongings looking for evidence of their betrayal. I started in their bedroom, the same bedroom that used to be Frank's in my craft room where I'd sew curtains and he'd build model airplanes. And honey, my voice caught with pure excitement when I found a folder labeled Mom's Finances hidden in Jessica's dresser drawer, tucked behind her collection of romance novels and underneath a stack of credit card statements that showed they were deeper in debt than I'd realized. Inside that folder were copies of my bank statements, statements they had no legal right to possess, my Social Security information, my Medicare cards, and sweetie, you could hear the joy bubbling up in my voice when I realized what I was looking at. They'd been monitoring my finances for months, tracking every deposit, every withdrawal, every purchase I made, like I was some kind of criminal suspect, instead of the woman who'd raised one of them and welcomed the other into our family. But that wasn't the worst part, not by a long shot. The words just tumbled out faster than I could think when I found the real smoking gun, the evidence that proved beyond any doubt that they weren't just frustrated family members trying to cope with an elderly relative, they were predators planning to financially exploit someone they saw as weak and vulnerable. Hidden in that same folder were applications to 3 different assisted living facilities around Tucson: Desert Sunset Manor on the east side, Golden Years Villa near the airport, and Peaceful Gardens Retirement Community way out on the west side where land was cheaper and the facilities looked more like prisons than homes. All 3 applications were filled out in Michael's handwriting, his distinctive scrawl that I recognized from years of signing school permission slips and birthday cards. And at the bottom of each application, in the space marked resident signature, was my name written in Michael's handwriting. Honey, my voice was dripping with all that irony when I realized what I was looking at. My own son had forged my signature on legal documents, committing a felony that could have sent him to prison for 5 years, all so he could warehouse me somewhere cheap and get me out of his hair. But the applications were just the beginning of their scheme. I couldn't help but let out this bitter little laugh when I found Michael's notebook, a spiral-bound composition book like the ones he'd used in high school, filled with pages of calculations and plans written in his own hand. Estimated costs, the first page read. Desert Sunset Manor, $4,800 a month. Golden Years Villa, $5,200 a month. And Peaceful Gardens Retirement Community, $4,400 a month. He'd done his research, shopping around for the cheapest place to dump his mother like she was a used car he was trying to get rid of. But here's where it gets interesting, y'all, and this is where my blood started boiling like water on a hot stove. My Social Security payments and Frank's pension only add up to about $2,400 monthly. So where did my brilliant son expect the other $2,000 to $2,800 to come from every single month?
Sweetie, I found myself whispering like someone might overhear because I could barely process what I was reading when I turned to the next page in Michael's notebook. There, written in his own handwriting, was the answer that made everything crystal clear. Sell mom's house. Zillow estimate $380,000. After realtor fees and closing costs, approximately $350,000 net. Monthly facility cost $4,800 equals $57,600 per year. Mom's life expectancy, according to online calculator, 12 to 15 years. Total care costs, approximately $700,000. Remaining funds after care costs, $0. But we'll have the boys' college paid for and a nice nest egg from selling all her furniture and jewelry. Honey, I had to sit down on their bed, my bed, in my house, because I felt like I might faint. My own son wasn't just planning to put me in a nursing home against my will. He was planning to sell my house, liquidate my entire life, and use the money to pay for warehousing me in the cheapest facility he could find until I died. And then, as a bonus, he'd pocket whatever was left over for his family's benefit. The house that Frank and I had worked 2 jobs each to pay off early, working overtime and weekends and holidays for 30 years, eating bologna sandwiches and generic cereal so we could make extra payments on the principal. The house where I'd planned to live out my golden years, tending my desert garden and sitting on the front porch in the evenings, surrounded by memories of the man I'd loved for 42 years. You know what? I stopped talking for a hot minute because the silence stretched between us like a canyon, except this time it wasn't the silence of shock or hurt feelings. It was the silence of pure, cold determination. If Michael wanted to play games with his old mama, if he thought he could manipulate and defraud a woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, then honey, he had absolutely no idea what mama was about to do next. You could hear the mischief just dancing in my tone when I realized something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Michael had made one crucial mistake in his evil little plan. He'd assumed that his mother was a helpless old lady who wouldn't fight back. But what he'd forgotten was that Dorothy Mae Henderson hadn't survived 68 years, including raising a son mostly by herself while Frank worked construction jobs that took him away for weeks at a time by being weak or stupid.
That afternoon, I drove my old Honda Civic, the 2003 model that Jessica was always complaining about taking up valuable driveway space that could be used for their newer, fancier cars, straight down Campbell Avenue to downtown Tucson to see Frank's old friend Harold Rodriguez, who'd been practicing elder law for 30 years and had helped us set up our original wills back in 1995. Y'all could hear the mischief just dancing in my tone when I walked into Harold's office in that old adobe building near the courthouse and said, "Harold, I need to make some changes to my will. I need to explore my legal options regarding financial elder abuse, and I need to do it all today before my son figures out that I'm not the senile old fool he thinks I am." Harold, bless his heart, had always treated me with the respect Michael should have been showing me. He was one of those old school gentlemen who still stood up when a lady entered the room, who still held doors open and said please and thank you like his mama had taught him proper manners. He listened carefully while I explained the whole situation, showing him Michael's notebook, the forged applications, copies of my bank statements that they had no legal right to possess. Honey, you could hear the satisfaction just creeping into my voice when Harold started outlining my options, because it turned out that Michael and Jessica had committed not one, not two, but several serious crimes in their little scheme to get rid of me. "Dorothy," Harold said, leaning back in his leather chair and adjusting his reading glasses, "legally speaking, that house is yours free and clear, and Michael has absolutely no claim to it unless you specifically leave it to him in your will. But more importantly, based on what you've shown me here today, we're looking at financial elder abuse, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. These are felony charges that could result in significant prison time." The words came out sharper than I meant them to when I told Harold exactly what I wanted to do. "Harold, I don't want Michael to get one single penny from me or Frank. Not now, not ever. Not the house, not the life insurance money Frank left me, not my grandmother's jewelry that's been in our family for 3 generations, not the savings account we built up over 40 years of hard work. Absolutely nothing. I want to leave everything to someone who actually deserves it, someone who loves me for who I am instead of what I can do for them." Y'all, Harold's eyebrows went up like window shades when I told him my plan, but he started drafting the paperwork anyway because he understood something that Michael had forgotten. Respect isn't optional. It's required, and when you stop respecting your elders, you lose the right to benefit from their lifetime of hard work and sacrifice. My new will would leave the house and all my assets to my sister Margaret, with specific instructions that if Michael or Jessica ever needed help in the future, they'd have to ask Margaret nicely, and she'd have complete discretion to say no if they approached her with the same entitled attitude they'd been showing me. But honey, that wasn't nearly enough for me. Y'all could hear the mischief just dancing in my voice when I asked Harold about one more thing. "Harold, is there a way to make Michael find out about this new will in the most educational way possible? Because I want him to understand exactly what he's losing and why he's losing it." That's when Harold smiled, the first time I'd seen him smile during our whole conversation, and said, "Dorothy, have you ever heard of what we lawyers call a family meeting? It's a formal conference where we discuss estate planning with all the interested parties present. Very official, very legal, very illuminating." I couldn't stop the little giggle that escaped when Harold explained his idea. We'd schedule a family financial planning meeting for the following Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, where Harold would present what he called estate planning options to Michael and Jessica. During that meeting, he'd casually mentioned that I'd been considering updating my will to reflect recent changes in family dynamics and concerns about my long-term care and housing situation. The beauty of Harold's plan, sweetie, was that it would force Michael and Jessica to tip their hand completely. If they were really just concerned, loving family members worried about my well-being, they'd be supportive of me maintaining control of my finances and making my own decisions about my future. But if they were planning to benefit financially from shipping me off against my will, they'd start asking all the wrong questions and reveal their true motivations. My voice took on this knowing, satisfied quality when I scheduled that meeting for the upcoming Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Y'all, I spent the rest of that week acting like the confused, helpless old lady they thought I was, letting Jessica rearrange my kitchen cabinets and criticize my cooking, letting Michael talk down to me about staying organized and being more careful with my things, letting them both think they were successfully manipulating a vulnerable, isolated elderly woman who had nowhere else to turn.
But honey, every single night, I'd sit in Frank's old recliner, and I could feel those tears starting to sting when I thought about how disappointed Frank would be in the man our son had become. Frank used to say, "Dorothy May, that boy's got a good heart buried under all that stubbornness. He just needs time to find his way and figure out what really matters in life." Well, sweetie, 43 years later, Michael was still looking for his way, and apparently he thought it led straight through my bank account and over my dead body. But I also thought about what Frank would say about my plan for justice, and I could almost hear his voice. "Dorothy May, sometimes you've got to teach people how to treat you, and the best teacher is consequences. Make sure the punishment fits the crime, and make sure they understand exactly why it's happening." Saturday afternoon arrived like Christmas morning for someone planning the perfect revenge. And I couldn't help but let out this anticipatory little laugh when Michael and Jessica sat down in Harold's wood-paneled conference room, both of them trying to look like concerned, loving family members instead of the financial predators they'd revealed themselves to be. Harold started the meeting with what sounded like routine estate planning talk, reviewing assets, discussing healthcare directives, talking about long-term care insurance options and power of attorney documents. But y'all, I could see Michael's ears perk up like a dog hearing a can opener the moment Harold mentioned the house's current market value. "According to recent comparable sales in your neighborhood, Mrs. Henderson," Harold shuffled through his papers with theatrical precision, "your property is currently worth approximately $380,000, which represents a significant appreciation from your original purchase price of $89,000 in 1987. Honey, you should have seen Jessica sit up straighter in her chair like someone had plugged her into an electrical socket. Michael leaned forward like a hunting dog catching the scent of wounded prey. Both of them were practically drooling at the mention of all that money just sitting there in the form of my house. Now, Harold continued, his voice taking on that serious lawyer tone, Mrs. Henderson has been reconsidering some aspects of her current will, particularly in light of recent discussions about assisted living arrangements and long-term care planning options. My voice was pure excitement, sweetie, when I realized they were about to walk right into Harold's perfectly laid trap, like mice following a trail of cheese that led straight into a cage. "What kind of reconsiderations?" Michael asked, and I could hear that fake casual tone he used when he really wanted something but was trying to pretend he didn't care too much. The same tone he used as a teenager when he wanted to borrow the car or needed money for something he knew we couldn't afford.
Harold adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Michael with the kind of stare that made guilty people squirm in their seats. "Well, your mother mentioned that you and your wife have been researching care facilities for her. She wants to make sure her estate planning reflects the reality of who's actually committed to her long-term well-being and who might be, shall we say, motivated by other considerations." The words came out between little internal sobs when I watched my son's face change from eager anticipation to something that looked like panic. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the guilt he should have been feeling all along, the recognition that maybe he'd crossed the line he shouldn't have crossed. But then Jessica's elbow found his ribs in a sharp jab, and that guilty expression disappeared faster than morning dew in the Arizona desert. "We just want what's best for Mom," Jessica said. And sweetie, her voice was so sweet it could have given you diabetes and cavities at the same time. Y'all, I couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own two eyes when Harold pulled out the folder I'd given him. Copies of all those forged applications Michael had filled out, along with photocopies of his notebook where he'd calculated how much money he could make by selling my house and liquidating my entire life. Mrs. Henderson found these documents in her home, Harold said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority and moral judgment. Applications to assisted living facilities filled out in someone else's handwriting with what appears to be Mrs. Henderson's forged signature at the bottom. There's also evidence of unauthorized access to her financial information and detailed calculations regarding the sale of her property and the disposition of her assets. The silence in that room stretched longer than a summer day in Tucson, the kind of oppressive quiet that comes right before a monsoon storm when the air gets thick and electric and you know something big is about to happen. I had to stop and catch my breath before I could even process the look on Michael's face, part panic, part anger, part embarrassment at being caught red-handed like a kid with his hand in the cookie jar. "Mom, I can explain," Michael started, but Harold held up his hand with the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years dealing with family disputes and financial fraud. "Mr. Henderson," Harold said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of legal consequences. "What you've done here constitutes financial elder abuse under Arizona state law. Forging your mother's signature on legal documents is identity theft. Accessing her financial information without permission is a violation of privacy laws. Researching the sale of her property without her knowledge and planning to institutionalize her against her will are forms of financial and emotional abuse that carry serious criminal penalties." Honey, I could barely whisper those words out loud when I watched my own son realize that his sweet little scheme to get rid of me and take my money had blown up in his face like a firecracker in a paper bag. Jessica's face had gone white as a sheet, and she kept looking back and forth between Michael and the door like she was calculating how fast she could run to her car and drive back to California where her family lived. But y'all, that wasn't even the best part of Harold's presentation. You could hear the satisfaction dancing in my voice when Harold pulled out the next set of papers, my new will, already signed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk's office. "Mrs. Henderson has updated her estate plan," Harold announced with the solemnity of a judge reading a verdict. "Effective immediately, the house, all financial assets, all personal property, and all future inheritance will now go to her sister, Margaret Rodriguez of Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. Henderson and his family are no longer beneficiaries of any part of Mrs. Henderson's estate." The words came out softer than a church mouse when I finally spoke up, breaking my silence with the kind of quiet authority that comes from finally standing up for yourself after years of being walked on. Michael, honey, you told your wife I didn't belong in my own home anymore. You made plans to sell my house, take my money, and warehouse me somewhere cheap until I died. Well, I've decided you're absolutely right about one thing. I don't belong in a house with people who see me as nothing but a paycheck and a burden to be managed.
Y'all, my voice broke right in half, y'all, when I had to look my own son in the eye and tell him the consequences of his actions. I moved into Phoenix to live with Aunt Margaret, who actually wants me around and treats me like family instead of like an inconvenience. The house will be sold when I pass away, and every single penny will go to people who actually love me instead of just tolerating me until they can cash in on my death. You should have seen Michael's face when the full reality hit him like a sledgehammer. No inheritance, no house to sell, no college fund for the boys that came from grandma's lifetime of sacrifice and hard work, no nest egg from liquidating my furniture and jewelry, just the natural consequences of treating my mother like an inconvenient piece of furniture he wanted to store somewhere cheap and out of sight. "Mom, please," Michael said, and for the first time in months, he sounded like the little boy I used to tuck into bed every night, the child who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares and ask me to sing him back to sleep. "We never meant for you to feel unwanted. We were just trying to make sure you be safe and cared for as you get older. We love you." I couldn't help but let out this bitter little laugh when I heard him try to spin his scheme to defraud me as being motivated by love and concern. "Michael, sweetheart, I've been taking care of myself just fine since before you were born. And I managed to raise you and keep this household running even when your father was away for work. What I needed from my family was love and respect and the basic human decency to include me in decisions about my own life, not to have you plotting behind my back about how to get rid of me and take everything I've worked for." But Harold wasn't finished with his legal education session. "Mr. Henderson, there's also the matter of your current living situation. Since Mrs. Henderson is the sole owner of this property, and you've demonstrated that you're not acting in her best interests, she's within her rights to ask you to find alternative housing arrangements." Jessica finally found her voice, and it came out like a squeak. "You're evicting us?" "I'm giving you 30 days, I said, and my voice was steady as a rock because I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. 30 days to find somewhere else to live since you were so eager to research living arrangements for other people. Now you can try researching some for yourselves." The meeting ended with Harold explaining exactly what would happen if Michael or Jessica tried to contest the will or challenge my decisions. They'd face criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery, and they'd lose any chance of ever reconciling with me or having a relationship with their children's grandmother. That evening, I packed my bags. Not because my son had told me I didn't belong there, but because I'd finally realized he was right, just not in the way he meant it. I didn't belong in a house full of people who saw me as a burden instead of a blessing, who calculated my worth in dollars instead of measuring it in love. Y'all, I spent the last night in that house sitting in Frank's recliner, and I could feel those tears threaten to spill over when I remembered all the good times we'd had there. Michael's first steps across the living room carpet, his chubby little hands reaching for me as he wobbled and fell into my arms. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered everywhere and the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven.
Frank and me slow dancing in the kitchen to old country songs on the radio while dinner cooked on the stove. But honey, you know what I realized as I sat there surrounded by boxes and memories? Those beautiful moments didn't belong to the house. They belonged to me. And I could take them anywhere I wanted to go, to any place where people actually wanted me around and appreciated the love I had to give. The next morning, Margaret arrived in her pickup truck to help me load my things, and sweetie, you could hear the joy bubbling up in my voice when I saw how excited she was to have me come stay with her. "Dorothy May," she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. "We're going to have such a good time together, just like we were girls back in Oklahoma when life was simpler and family meant something." Michael came out to help carry boxes, and I could see he'd been crying. Probably the first time he shed real tears since his father's funeral. Part of me wanted to comfort him like I'd done when he was little and scraped his knee or had a bad dream or got picked on at school. But honey, some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And my 43-year-old son needed to learn that treating people with love and respect isn't optional. It's required, especially when those people are your parents who sacrificed everything to give you a better life. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. I know I messed up, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I want you to know that I love you, and I never meant for things to turn out like this. The words came out between little sobs when I looked at my baby boy, still my baby, even at 43 years old, and said, "Michael, I forgive you, sweetie, because that's what mothers do. But forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences for your actions. You and Jessica decided I didn't belong in my own home, so now you get to figure out where you belong instead." As we drove away from Tucson towards Phoenix, I watched my house getting smaller in the side mirror. The house where I'd been so happy with Frank. The house where I'd raised my son with all the love in my heart. The house that has sheltered everything I loved most in the world. But you know what, y'all? I wasn't sad anymore. I was free. Free from the tension, free from the disrespect, free from walking on eggshells in my own home. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The drive to Phoenix took about 2 hours, and Margaret and I spent the whole time talking and laughing like we hadn't done since we were teenagers back in Tulsa when life was simpler and family meant something. Margaret's house in Phoenix turned out to be all the things it hadn't been for mine for the past 2 years. Full of laughter, full of respect, full of people who were genuinely happy to see me every morning instead of treating me like an unwelcome guest who'd overstayed her welcome. We spent our days gardening together in her beautiful backyard, cooking meals that we actually enjoyed instead of rushing through awkward dinner moments. Watching old movies and sharing memories of our childhood back in Oklahoma when life was simpler and family meant something. Within a week of moving in with Margaret, I felt like a different person. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach disappeared. I stopped jumping every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, stopped second-guessing every word I said, stopped feeling like I had to apologize for existing in my own space. Margaret made it clear from day one that this was our home now, that I wasn't a burden or a guest, but a beloved sister who belonged.
"Dorothy May," she said one morning over coffee and homemade biscuits, "I can see you blooming again like a flower that was wilting in bad soil but found good earth to grow in. You're starting to look like yourself again instead of like someone who's been beaten down by people who should have been building you up." 3 months later, Harold called me with an update that made me smile for the first time since Frank passed. "Dorothy," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice, "I thought you'd want to know what's happened with Michael and Jessica since they moved out of your house. Y'all,
The picture Harold painted was both sad and educational. Michael and Jessica had been forced to move into a small two-bedroom apartment across town in a complex that wasn't in the best neighborhood, but was all they could afford on Michael's unemployment benefits. The stress of their financial situation and the reality of what they'd lost had apparently caused some serious problems in their marriage. Jessica's been asking around about divorce lawyers, Harold told me, and Michael has taken a job at Home Depot, not glamorous work, but honest work that requires him to show up every day and treat customers with respect, something he apparently needed to learn how to do. But the most important part of Harold's update was about my grandsons. Dorothy, those boys have been asking Margaret if they can come visit their grandma Dorothy. According to what I've heard through mutual friends, they miss you terribly. They keep asking their parents why Grandma moved away and when they can see you again. Honey, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing when I heard that Tommy and Tyler missed me because those boys had been the innocent victims in their parents' scheme. They'd lost their grandmother not because I didn't love them, but because their parents had tried to use me and dispose of me like garbage. Tell Margaret those boys are welcome anytime they want to come visit, I told Harold. But they come to see me because they love me and I love them, not because anyone thinks Grandma might have money or favors to hand out. And their parents need to understand that respect works both ways. If they want their children to have a relationship with their grandmother, they need to treat that grandmother with the dignity she deserves. 4 months after I moved to Phoenix, something wonderful happened that proved sometimes the universe has a perfect sense of timing and justice. I got a call from a real estate agent in Tucson who'd been contacted by someone interested in buying my old house. Mrs. Henderson, the agent said, there's a young couple with 2 small children who absolutely love your house. They're both teachers at the local elementary school, and they say it feels like a real family home, the kind of place where people stay forever and make happy memories. They're offering full asking price, and they want to close as soon as possible because the husband got a promotion and they need to move before the new school year starts. Honey, my voice caught with pure excitement when I realized that my house, Frank's and my house, was going to be loved again by people who understood what a blessing it is to have a real home filled with people who want you there. The Martinez family, Roberto and Elena with their 6-year-old daughter Sophia and 4-year-old son Diego, reminded me so much of Frank and me when we were young and full of dreams about the future we'd build together. The sale went through in 30 days, smooth as silk, and y'all, I decided to do something with that money that probably would have made Frank proud and definitely sent a message to my son about the consequences of his actions. I took $75,000 of the proceeds and set up college funds for Tommy and Tyler to be managed by Margaret and only accessible if the boys maintained good grades, stayed out of trouble, and treated their elders, all their elders, with respect and kindness. The rest of the money went into a trust that would ensure Margaret and I could live comfortably for the rest of our lives, with enough left over to support the causes we cared about: the children's hospital where Margaret volunteered, the animal shelter where I started helping out twice a week, and a scholarship fund for young people who needed help paying for trade school or college. 6 months after moving to Phoenix, I was helping Margaret in her garden one morning when we heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up to see Michael getting out of an old Ford pickup truck, and honey, he looked like a different person than the entitled, disrespectful man who'd planned to warehouse me in a nursing home. He was thinner, his clothes were clean, but clearly not expensive, and he had the kind of humbled expression that comes from learning hard lessons about what really matters in life. "Mom," he said, walking slowly toward the garden like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome, I was wondering if we could talk. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, about what I did, and I wanted to apologize properly. Margaret looked at me with raised eyebrows, silently asking me if I wanted her to stay or give us some privacy. I nodded toward the house, and she squeezed my shoulder before going inside to give Michael and I some space to talk. We sat on Margaret's back porch swing, the one that looked out over her beautiful desert garden with its blooming Palo Verde trees and colorful wildflowers. And for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, Michael took a deep breath and started talking. Mom, I need you to know that losing you was the wake-up call I apparently needed, but was too proud to admit I needed. When Harold showed us those papers, when I saw how hurt and disappointed you are, when I realized that I'd become the kind of man who would steal from his own mother and lie to her about it, I hated myself. The words came out softer than a mouse when I said, Michael, honey, I never wanted you to hate yourself. I wanted you to become a better person, but not through self-hatred, through understanding and growth and making amends for the hurt you caused. He nodded and wiped his eyes. Jessica and I are getting divorced, Mom. She moved back to California last month and took the boys with her, at least temporarily. She said she couldn't handle the financial stress and the shame of what we'd done, and she blamed me for ruining our lives by being so greedy and disrespectful to you. Y'all, part of me wanted to feel vindicated hearing that Jessica was gone, but mostly I just felt sad for my grandsons who were caught in the middle of their parents' mistakes. Michael, what about Tommy and Tyler? How are they handling all this chaos? That's actually why I'm here, he said, his voice getting stronger and more determined. The boys have been asking about you constantly. They want to know why Grandma moved away, when they can see you again, why Christmas and birthdays don't feel the same anymore without you. And Mom, I realized that I robbed them of their grandmother because I was too selfish and short-sighted to appreciate what I had. My voice broke in half when I heard how much my grandsons missed me because those boys had done nothing wrong except have parents who made terrible decisions. Michael, those boys are always welcome here. Margaret and I would love to have them visit any time Jessica will allow it, but I need you to understand something. If they come here, it's because we love them and they love us, not because anyone expects anything from me except love and respect.
Michael spent the next hour telling me about the changes he'd made in his life. He'd started going to counseling to understand why he'd become so entitled and disrespectful. He'd joined a support group for people dealing with financial stress and family problems. He'd taken responsibility for his actions instead of blaming other people or circumstances for his mistakes. I got a promotion at Home Depot, he said with a pride I hadn't heard in his voice for years. I'm an assistant manager now, and Mom, I actually love the work. I help people solve problems. I treat customers the way I should have been treating you all along. And I've learned that honest work feels a lot better than scheming to take what doesn't belong to you. But the most important thing Michael told me was about the letter he'd written to his father's grave, the letter that made me cry and forgive him completely. I went to Dad's grave last week, he said, and I told him everything. I apologized for becoming the kind of man who had hurt his own mother, for forgetting everything he tried to teach me about treating people right, for being so focused on money and convenience that I lost sight of what really matters. Y'all, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing when Michael pulled out a folded piece of paper and read me part of what he'd written to Frank. Dad, I'm sorry it took losing Mom to understand what you were trying to teach me my whole life. You always said that character's what you do when nobody's watching.
And when I thought nobody was watching, I became a person you wouldn't recognize or respect. But I'm working every day to become the kind of man who deserves to be called your son, the kind of man who honors your memory by treating people, especially Mom, with the love and respect they deserve. Honey, I cried reading that letter because it proved that people can change, that love doesn't have to mean letting yourself be mistreated, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set boundaries and stick to them even when it breaks your heart. A year later, I'm sitting in Margaret's beautiful kitchen in Phoenix, watching another gorgeous desert sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, and honey, I've never been happier in my life. Michael visits once a month now, bringing flowers for Margaret and helping with yard work and actually listening when I tell him stories about his father and our early years together. Tommy and Tyler spend every other weekend with us now after Jessica realized that keeping them away from their grandmother wasn't helping anyone and was actually hurting her relationship with her sons. The boys call me every Sunday night to tell me about school and their friends and their dreams for the future. And they've learned that Grandma Dorothy is someone who loves them unconditionally, but also expects them to be respectful, kind young men. The house in Tucson is thriving under the care of the Martinez family. And I get Christmas cards from them every year with pictures of their children playing in the same backyard where Michael used to catch fireflies and build forts out of cardboard boxes. Elena writes little notes telling me they can feel the love in that house, and they're making new happy memories there every day. Last month, Michael brought me the most beautiful gift I could have asked for. A photo album he'd made of all our family memories from when he was growing up. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, Little League games and school plays, family vacations and quiet Sunday afternoons. And on the last page, he'd written a note that made me cry happy tears. Mom, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that home isn't a place. It's where people love you and want you around. Thank you for showing me that respect isn't optional, that family means taking care of each other instead of taking advantage of each other, and that the best way to honor someone's memory is to become worthy of their love. I love you, and I'm proud to be your son, Michael. Sometimes people ask me if I regret being so firm with Michael, if I wish I'd just gone along with their plan to keep the peace and stay in the family. But here's what I've learned through this whole experience. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses. Michael needed to learn that other people, even his own mother, weren't just supporting characters in his life story. He needed to learn that respect is earned through actions, not inherited through family connections. And you know what? He did learn. It took losing everything he thought he was entitled to, but he learned. Now when he comes to visit, he brings genuine gratitude instead of entitled expectations. He asks about my life instead of calculating my worth. He treats Margaret and I like honored guests in our own home instead of burdens he's obligated to tolerate. The boys have learned too. Tommy and Tyler understand now that being family means more than sharing DNA. It means choosing to love and respect each other every single day. They've seen what happens when people take family for granted, and they've seen what happens when family members actually appreciate each other. Margaret and I have created something beautiful here in Phoenix, something I never could have imagined when I was sitting in that house in Tucson, feeling invisible and unwanted. We've built a home based on mutual respect and genuine affection, where both of us feel valued and appreciated every single day. We garden together, cook together, laugh together, and support each other through the challenges that come with getting older. We've also become active in our community in ways I never was when I was consumed with trying to manage family drama. Margaret and I volunteer at the local food bank every Tuesday, and we've started a support group for women over 65 who are dealing with difficult family situations. Y'all, you'd be amazed how many grandmothers have stories similar to mine. Adult children who see them as ATMs instead of people, families who take their sacrifices for granted, relatives who assume that getting older means giving up your right to be treated with dignity. Our support group has helped dozens of women understand that they don't have to accept disrespectful treatment just because it's coming from family members. We've helped women set boundaries, seek legal protection when necessary, and find housing situations where they're appreciated instead of tolerated. Some of the transformations I've witnessed remind me of my own journey from feeling powerless to taking control of my life. 6 months ago, something happened that proved the universe really does have a sense of humor and justice. I got a call from Jessica, who'd moved back from California and was living in a small apartment in Tucson with the boys. Her voice was different, more humble and more genuine than I ever heard it sound. "Dorothy," she said, and I could hear genuine remorse in her voice. "I wanted to apologize for my part in what happened. I got caught up in worrying about money and security, and I forgot that you weren't just Michael's mother. You were a person who deserved respect and kindness. I'm sorry I supported his plan to put you in a nursing home, and I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome in your own house." Y'all, I have to admit that I was surprised by Jessica's call, but I was even more surprised by how sincere she sounded. It turned out that living as a single mother with limited financial resources had given her a new perspective on what really matters in life.
"The boys miss you every day," she continued. "They keep asking why Grandma Dorothy doesn't love them anymore, and I have to explain that you do love them, but that Mommy and Daddy made mistakes that hurt your feelings. I was wondering, would it be possible for them to spend some time with you this summer? Not because I want anything from you, but because they need their grandmother, and you probably miss them too." Honey, I could barely get the words out when I told Jessica that Tommy and Tyler could spend as much time with us as she was comfortable allowing. "Jessica, those boys are innocent in all this, and I've missed them more than you can possibly imagine. They're welcome here anytime, and so are you if you're genuinely interested in building a respectful relationship instead of trying to manage or manipulate me." That summer turned out to be one of the most healing experiences of my life. Tommy and Tyler spent 2 weeks with Margaret and me, and we fell back into the loving relationship we'd always had before their parents' scheme came between us. We baked cookies and told stories and worked in the garden and played board games and watched old movies together. But more importantly, those boys learned some valuable lessons about family, respect, and the consequences of treating people poorly. They saw how happy I was living with someone who appreciated me, and they understood that their grandmother hadn't abandoned them. She'd removed herself from a situation where she wasn't being treated with the love and respect she deserved. "Grandma," Tyler said one evening as we were sitting on the porch swing watching the stars come out, "I'm sorry Mommy and Daddy were mean to you. That wasn't right. And I want you to know that I think you're the best grandma in the whole world." Tommy nodded and added, "When I grow up, I'm going to treat my family the way you treat us, with love and kindness and respect. I don't ever want anyone I love to feel like they have to move away because I wasn't nice to them." Y'all, those words from my grandsons meant more to me than any apology from the adults could have, because they proved that this whole painful experience had taught the next generation some important lessons about how to treat the people you love. Jessica came to pick up the boys at the end of their visit, and I could see she'd been crying when she saw how happy and settled they were with Margaret and me. "Dorothy,
I can see how much you love them and how good this is for them. Would it be okay if this became a regular thing? Maybe they could spend part of every summer with you and visit on some weekends during the school year." The words came out with more warmth than I'd felt toward Jessica in years when I told her, "Jessica, honey, those boys are always welcome here, and so are you. Family relationships can be healed if people are willing to do the work and treat each other right. But I need you to understand that respect isn't negotiable. It's required." 2 years later, as I'm finishing this story, I want y'all to know how everything turned out. Because I believe in happy endings when they're earned through hard work and genuine change. Michael has been promoted twice at Home Depot and now manages his own department. He's dating a lovely woman named Sarah who treats him well and encourages his efforts to be a better man and father. More importantly, he's become the kind of person who deserves happiness because he's learned to give as much as he receives. Jessica finished her nursing degree and works at a hospital in Tucson. She sends me updates about the boys' school activities and achievements, and she's never again made me feel like a burden or an inconvenience. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's based on mutual respect now instead of manipulation and scheming. Tommy and Tyler are 12 now, and they're growing into young men who understand that family means choosing to love and support each other every single day. They spend every summer with Margaret and me, and during the school year, they call us twice a week and visit at least once a month. They've learned that their grandma Dorothy is someone who will always love them, but who also expects them to be kind, respectful young people. The college funds I set up for them have grown substantially, and they know the money will be there for their education as long as they continue to work hard in school and treat people right. But more importantly, they've learned that education and opportunity are privileges that come with responsibilities. Margaret and I are both healthy and happy at ages 68 and 71. We've created a life together that's rich with friendship, purpose, and genuine joy. Our home is always full of laughter and interesting conversation and people who are genuinely glad to be here. We've proven that getting older doesn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. It means gaining wisdom and the confidence to demand the respect you've earned through a lifetime of loving and sacrifice. Last week, I got a letter that made me cry happy tears. It was from Roberto Martinez, the man who bought my house in Tucson with his family. He wrote to tell me that they're expecting their third child, and they wanted me to know that they think of Frank and me every day as they raise their children in the home we built with so much love. "Mrs. Henderson," he wrote, "we can feel the love in every corner of this house. Our children play in the same rooms where your son grew up, and we try every day to fill this home with the same kind of happiness and respect that you and your husband created here. Thank you for taking such good care of this place and for passing it on to a family that understands what a blessing it is to have a real home." So when my son whispered, "You don't belong here anymore," on that terrible October night 2 years ago, he thought he was solving a problem by getting rid of a burden. But what he actually did was set me free to discover where I really belonged. Not in a house where I was tolerated and taken for granted, but in a home where I'm celebrated and appreciated every single day. And that, sweetie, is the difference between existing and living, between being a victim and being empowered, between accepting whatever treatment people decide to give you and demanding the respect you've earned through a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Y'all, if you're dealing with family members who make you feel invisible or unwanted, if you're being taken for granted by people who should be grateful for everything you've done for them, remember this story. You deserve to be in places where people are genuinely happy to see you walk through the door. You deserve respect, kindness, and appreciation for all the love you've given over the years. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do, the thing that teaches people the most important lessons about how to treat others, is to pack your bags, walk away with your dignity intact, and show them exactly what they're losing when they take you for granted. Because, honey, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well, being happy, and surrounding yourself with people who understand that you are a blessing, not a burden. And let me tell you, y'all, that's exactly what I did, and it's exactly what you can do too. The morning after I packed my bags wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the best chapter of my life. And if you're brave enough to demand the respect you deserve, it could be the beginning of your best chapter too.